Hey, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Beware's online YouTube live today about World Bee Day and answering your frequently asked questions. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to answering your frequently asked questions as beginner beekeepers or even advanced beekeepers. We've been in the industry for a long time, and feels like there's still so much to learn. There's always learning that's going on, and hopefully we can help you learn beekeeping as well in the process. So if you go to into the chat section there, post up your question that you have, and I'll get back to you on that as soon as I can. But in the meantime, we've got some awesome, amazing things to talk about for today for World Bee Day, and one of them is that we're doing a giveaway. We're doing 3 giveaways for our standard for our Start Beekeeping Pro Bundle online course. So if you fill out the survey that's in the comments below, which is about 10 questions about beekeeping industry, you can qualify this afternoon. We will be doing a wheel of names spin, and 3 winners then will get access to the Pro Bundle, which is worth $77 for the online course that we're offering. And also included in that draw, well, as part of a separate draw this afternoon, we'll be doing a ebook giveaway as well, which is going to be for free. So if you get the details on the Facebook Live, so that'll be facebook.com/bewareza, and we'll see you guys there this afternoon if you weren't able to make it to the Facebook Live. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for anybody's questions, you're more than welcome to post your questions in the chat, and we will be answering those as soon as we can. But in the meantime, so I know there are a bunch of frequently asked questions that beginner beekeepers always ask us at our training. And so let's start with some of those. So one of them is, can I keep bees near chickens? And because a lot of the beekeepers, especially beginner beekeepers, are either farmsteaders, homesteaders, small holders, small property, holders, that kind of thing. And they've got chickens, they may have ducks, they probably have dogs. And the problem is that, there's how long is a piece of string? So you can actually keep chickens and bees on the same property. And most times they're likely to leave each other alone, except for if you're feeding your chickens, or when you're feeding your chickens, maizena and or any kind of maize-based or corn-based food. If there's a shortage of pollen in the area, then the bees will be attracted to that feed, okay, to that chicken feed. And when that happens, you're getting the chickens and bees going together. Basically, they're going to end up in the food, and chickens are going to get upset. The bees are going to get upset, and they could end up getting stung. So that's one of the major issues around chickens and bees, especially if they're kept close together. You may even find that if you don't have bees yet and you've got chickens, that this is happening anyways as well. This is the reason why the bees are after, especially if there's a pollen shortage in your area. Bees will go after that maizena, we call it in South Africa, or corn feed, or chicken feed, anything that's got corn or maize-based food in it. So that's point number 1 about chickens. Can I keep bees with chickens? Point number 2 would be, if the bees get upset, if they decide that they're going to start swarming or become defensive, or if they get disturbed, the chickens can't get away. And if they're within that 100-meter radius, the danger zone, DEFCON 5 zone, unfortunately, they will be stung, and they'll be probably stung to death. So there is that as a risk factor if you want to keep your bees in a close proximity to your chickens. And if you do still decide to go ahead and do that, what I would do is I'd make sure that there's a barrier between the bees and the chickens. So I'm not advising anybody to keep bees and chickens together for said reasons already. But also, if you do decide to go down that route, then put a barrier between the bees and the chickens. So if they're in a chicken hawk or a chicken pen or something like that, make sure the bees are facing the opposite direction, and so that they will be, the flight path will be away from the bees, from the chickens rather, and make sure that if they do need to be fed pollen, that you're feeding it directly in the hive rather than them having to go outside and into the chicken pen to go find it there. Okay, so those are my tips for you as far as keeping chickens and bees at the same time. Also, while we're on that topic of smallholders and homesteaders and that sort of thing, self-sustainable tribe wanting to keep bees, another frequently asked question, and feel free, I see we've got a couple more people joining, feel free to type your question, guys, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can on those in the chat. All right, down below you should have a chat section. So getting back to the keeping bees on a small holding or a homestead or a self-sufficient kind of even urban dwelling, and one of the other frequently asked questions from our learners is, can I keep bees in an urban dwelling or an urban setting? And the trouble with this question is that it's not an easy one to answer, because not all cities are created equal. Not all urban dwelling areas are created equal. So to give you an example, in South Africa, Cape Town doesn't really have any bylaws around keeping bees, to my knowledge, the last time I checked, whereas Pretoria Metropolitan, or Tshwane in South Africa, does. Okay, you can't keep bees in those areas legally. All right. So those are just two very quick examples. The same thing could be said for, say, London and Amsterdam and Paris. You know, these cities are, and New York even, these cities are pretty forward thinking, but they also don't have African bees, in that you can keep bees on the high rises and in urban areas without too much of an issue with regards to getting permits, which is another thing that you may be required to do if you're in an urban area. However, if you're in an agricultural area or farm area, that kind of thing, it's unlikely that you're going to have to go for a permit. But you may want to let your neighbors know, potentially, especially if you're aware that neighbors or nearby people that are nearby within, say, 500 meters, that if they have a known allergy, and or need to have an epipen or anything like that, where a bee sting is life-threatening. Now, the reason why I say this is nobody can really say that if somebody gets stung, it was your bees, but if they know that you have bees, the likelihood is that a finger is going to be pointed at you first, and that they will then seek potential recourse if there's a public injury or personal injury, or dare I say, potential death in the case of where somebody is really, really hyperallergenic, okay, where they actually have to be carrying an EpiPen. And some people don't even know that that's the case until they get stung, and then it might be too late. So that's a good one. Any question, guys, pop them down in the chat below, okay? I'll get back to you when and if you ask me any questions, which is one of the reasons why we're holding this freely asked questions live on YouTube. Right, so let me just get back to what's happening this afternoon. So in about an hour, actually in about 45 minutes or so, we've got a live Zoom where I'm going to be talking about the power of bees and opportunities for beekeepers, beginner beekeepers especially. So that's on Zoom, and if you want that link, you need to go to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/bewareza, and it's in the feed there, okay, where you can join us live on the Zoom. You just have to subscribe, give us your email so that we know, then you get access after that to the Zoom webinar room and the password that you need to join us there. And then we're going to be announcing, as I said, the winners for the 3 Pro Bundle Start Beekeeping online course, and that's at 2 p.m. London, 3 p.m. SA. And then we're also going to be giving the ebook giveaway, which is for beekeepers who want to save bees, relocate bees safely, and that's going to be given away as well to anybody who wants those. It's going to be a free download. Okay, so that's all going to be announced at 2 p.m. London time. That's on our Facebook Live, which is at 2 p.m. So if you can't make the Zoom just now or soon, then come join us on the Facebook Live at a later date, later time rather this afternoon. Right, here's a question from Liesel. Thanks, Liesel, for joining us. Is beekeeping worthwhile if I'm allergic, or just keep a epipen nearby? All right, so thanks, Liesel. That's a good question. My best friend, actually, when I started beekeeping, my best friend and I, we weren't allergic at all. Obviously everybody's allergic. We have an allergic reaction, but there's a spectrum of allergic reactions. So you get, everybody, because it's a toxin, we all get inflamed and we get itchy and we get sore. Okay, and it's painful. But if you are hyperallergic and you struggle to breathe and you're gonna go into anaphylactic shock and all that sort of stuff, which could happen even if you aren't hyperallergic, if you get enough stings, and you then know that you've been tested for this and you need an EpiPen to get to hospital in time, okay, to open up your throat and all those sort of things and give yourself get an adrenaline shot, then like my friend, it sounds like you like my friend. Eventually, he ended up building up a bit of a problem, and he ended up going to hospital at one stage. I had to rush him to hospital after working with some bees, and he ended up getting stung on the finger, but he got quite bad in such a way that he was struggling to breathe. He was starting to sort of almost lose consciousness at one point. Rushed him off to the hospital, and from that point onwards, we had to be, he made the choice to be exceptionally careful with the bees and to double up on his protective stuff and that sort of thing. But also, he had to start carrying adrenaline with him or an EpiPen. So that was up to him. He was, yeah, no problem, Walter Cree. Yeah, I got you though. I got you. So that was his problem, and he kind of decided he was going to still, go for it. Being a South African and maybe a bit of he was a rooi kop as well, and a harder kop. He had a hard head, and he wanted to just go ahead and just keep his passion was as big as mine in beekeeping, and we ended up keeping going forward. What he didn't do anymore though was bee removals, because bee removals, generally speaking, are pretty aggressive experiences. Whereas if you're calmly working with your bees, then generally speaking, you are unlikely to experience too much friction from them, and therefore his chances of being actually stung were a lot lower. So yeah, for you, Liesl, I can't really advise you, but I would just double get. I mean, I don't know if you have had tests done, but just double check that. Just have a test done so that you know that you are how bad you are. But most of us have an allergic reaction, and things like I think it's what's it called, vinegar and some bicarb mixed together. Rub it on the sting, or even honey. You can rub it on the sting, obviously after you've moved away from the bees. That helps quite a bit. And then don't take any really hot showers or baths. You want to be lukewarm to cool even for the first couple of days. That should help with stings. Any other questions, guys? Crickets. All right. So another frequently asked question that we get is, what happens when do we take honey off? Okay, so when do we take honey off? The point is that when you get honey, when the bees come back from the field, all right, they're carrying nectar, they're carrying pollen. They get to the hive, they then regurgitate it, usually pass it over to other hive bees who then transfer it into cells. Okay, but at this stage it's still nectar. It's about 80% moisture or liquid, and at no point can that be called honey. And this is why it's important for us to wait as beginner beekeepers, or as any beekeeper for that matter, for the cells to be full and for them to be capped, ideally. It doesn't always mean that when the cells are full and they're uncapped that the honey is unripe. This is a little bit of a little bit of a gray area there, but it's generally speaking, when the cells are full but they're uncapped, it can also mean that the bees are utilizing that resource a lot. So they don't want to cap and then uncap it and cap and uncap every day, like all day long. So what they'll do is when there's a flow on and they're utilizing that honey at the time, and the cells are full, they won't close it. And generally speaking, this also means that there's not necessarily enough space for the bees. They need another super or more frames. And then what happens is that once that happens and they've built and drawn out that comb, the new comb, they will seal the full cells and then start storing in the empty cells that they've now built. So it takes a while. It can take a couple of days for them to get to the point where they've dehumidified the moisture content from 80% down to anywhere between 16 and about 23%, depending on where you are in the world and what kind of honey you're dealing with, what kind of nectar it is, actually, the source of the nectar. And then once it's down to that point and it gets capped, and you should have about 85% capped or sealed comb before you harvest it, ideally. And the reason for this is that if you take say 50% and you harvest all of that, there's a very high chance actually that you can end up with the honey going bad and fermenting. And in which case then you could possibly end up turning it into a beer or something like that, but you certainly couldn't sell it as honey. So that's another frequently asked question. When do we harvest the honey? Well, you harvest it when 85% of the comb is capped. Okay. And then another frequently asked question, which is somewhat sort of interesting to us, because when I start, sometimes you forget where you started, as a beginner. And I look back now and I'm like, okay, that does make a lot of sense. A lot of guys who are beginners and hobbyists, they don't have more than 10 hives. So the chances of them having a budget or wanting to purchase an extractor, it's a big expense. It can be a big expense. It's a high cost and a high investment point for somebody who's got, like, let's say, just 2 hives. So what's the alternative to getting your honey? Well, you crush the honey, or you could use a dripping tray. The dripping tray is quite a long process, and you need to ideally heat the room to at least 26 degrees Celsius, and it's quite slow, as I say, slow and painful, and it can draw lots of bees from outside trying to get into your house or the room that you're using, whatever the case, of the kitchen, etc. If you crush the honey, the problem is that then the bees take about a week to rebuild, draw out the comb, and then replace that honey when there's a nectar flow. In the meantime, you missing out as a beekeeper, and so are the bees missing out in that nectar flow. In other words, while the comb's being taken away from them, and you put that empty frame back, they now have to focus their resources on building the comb before they can start storing the nectar that they were bringing in all along and thinking that they had space to store it in. You've taken that away. So you could put in an extra super. Effectively, you should be replacing the super you take off with an empty super or undrawn super. If you are a beginner beekeeper and it's your first year and you don't have a spare one with spare built-out super frames. But I'm assuming that you're a beginner, so in this case, you won't have that. So what you could do is you could take a frame. You could at least boost their building ability and give them a frame with super wax foundation sheets. And if you do that, obviously it does cost a bit of extra money, but once it's done the first time, generally speaking, if you're not crushing, then it's good. If you're going to crush, it's a waste of money, because you're going to basically break that wax sheet at the next time you harvest. So it's kind of like a give or take scenario. So how to harvest if you have under 10 hives? Well, essentially that's it. I would still crush the honey or drip tray the honey. So drip tray the honey is basically when you put you MacGyver a system where you've got a tray at the bottom, or a bucket, or a little filing box or something like that, a plastic filing box, and you MacGyver the situation where the frame can sit at about a 55 to 60 degree angle. You've uncapped that frame and you let it then drip out. Okay, so just using gravity, and it lets it drip out, and that way you're going to get a bunch of the honey out. You don't get all of it out. If you use heat, you get more out, but you don't get all of the honey out. And then you need to then, when the one side's done, you need to turn it over, let the other side do the same thing. And now you've got probably around about 70% of the honey that could be extracted out of those cells in your empty tub or tray or little plastic box that you've got. Okay, and then obviously that all needs to be filtered and then strained and then put into bottles, jars, as you like packaging. But it's one frame at a time. It's an arduous system. But if you only got 2 hives, it's okay, because you could rotate the situation, do it over a number of days or a number of weeks. So that's cool. If you're going to crush, you can use what we call a nylon strainer and let that drip into buckets, and you can seal that, which is quite nice. That's a sealable system. And then a little bit more upscale from this, a little bit more budget from this, is using a wine press, or what we call a honey press. Again, you're crushing the comb there, but it's much quicker. It takes like 10, 15 kilograms at a time, and it uses a spinning cork screw type effect that goes from the top down to the bottom with a plate. And as you turn the corkscrew, the plate moves down and it crushes the honey underneath it. And then the honey runs out the sides, and the wax stays in the middle. And then whatever you do, don't throw away the wax, because that can be repurposed. And that actually can be used to make your next little bits of wax strip and things like that to put back into frames and or candles and or beeswax creams and lotions, that sort of thing. Oh, Liesel, we got a question. Okay, so how many hives? You got veg, you got berries, that's good, and an established garden, 5 hectares. So so what a fantastic frequently asked question. Okay, so because people are like, this is my land space, this is what I got, how many hives can I put down? So rule of thumb, okay, is 1 hive per hectare. Okay, that's always been my rule of thumb in South Africa, and I think that would probably stand almost anywhere, unless you're in like a semi-arid area. But then there's factors. So the factors are, like you say, so you've got veg, you've got berries, you've got an established garden, and that's within your 5 hectares, which is what, 5,000 meters, is that right? Hectares is probably a bit more than that. It's 2.2 acres, right? So it's probably a bit more. But anyway, you've got a pretty good very core area from the sounds of things, but the bees are going to fly anywhere from within, they don't normally harvest within the first 50 to 100 meters typically, just because of pests, bee pirates, that kind of stuff. They don't harvest within that first 50 to 100 meter radius, traditionally speaking, but they will go and fly anywhere up to 3, 4, 5 kilometers away, but that doesn't make it very efficient for them. So a lot of research has been done around what's the efficient area that bees are going to forage from, and this is where maybe there's a better. Okay, so 50,000 square meters. Thanks. Yeah, cool. I thought my maths, because it's hectares, I thought my maths was a bit off there. I was thinking acres, but okay, cool. Thanks for that. So yeah, the bees are going to use a good deal of that area to forage in. Okay, but the short answer is a small colony is going to forage within about 750, efficiently forage within 750 meters away from the hive, okay, in diameter to that. A larger established colony is going to forage up to 1.25, 1.3 kilometers, so almost a mile. What's that, 800.8 miles, something like that. So it doesn't mean they can't go further than that, but that's their efficient zone. Okay, so ideally, when we become beekeepers or beginner beekeepers, we think, yeah, we're just going to learn about how to make some honey and look after the bees, and it's going to be awesome to be outdoors and doing this sort of thing. But what a lot of people don't know and what they don't tell you is that the moment you start learning about beekeeping, you also start learning about plants and botany. So, and the reason why I say this is because not all vegetable plants are created equal, not all berries are created equal in the sense of bees and honey production yield. Okay, So this is a very frequently asked question. So how many can you put down? Well, I would say, without knowing, I know that I have an idea that you got veg. I don't know what veg. I see you got berries. I don't know what berries. I don't know what other trees you got. And I don't know what other wild flora you've got. But I would say that you probably could get away with at least 5 hives there from the sounds of things. And then you'd have to guess, go from there. And an alternative is that, thanks for joining, guys, by the way. Elaine, I'm waiting for a question. I'm checking you out, Elaine. I'm waiting for that question. Bring it on. Don't be shy. Also, so what you're going to need to do is, like, what trees do you have, and then you could refer to the Blue Book, the Beekeeping in South Africa book, and or other botany type books. In fact, we're launching today a sister site, which, so that site actually has pollination reports on it. Okay, so essentially, because we got asked this question a lot, and it's a difficult question to answer because I don't know what plants you have, and until you can tell me what plants you have, it's very difficult for me to say, yeah, it's cool. You can put 10 hives down rather than 5. But what we've done is we've on my channel, there's about 5 or 6 videos about some of the more prominent trees and plants in South Africa and around the world where bees are rated. We can rate them by their pollen rating and their nectar rating, because the bees need both of those. Okay, pollen is the food, the protein. It's like their meat, and they need that for the babies and the brood. Okay, they need those for the brood and themselves, of course, but they need the nectar for themselves as well as as their carbs, their carbohydrates. Okay, so they have to have both to survive. And plants will provide different ratios of those two things. In some cases, none at all. Some cases, both very strongly. So that's pretty awesome. So I would say, my short answer is 5 hives. My long answer is figure out what you've got on your small holding in terms of plants and what you've got within a kilometer radius. So you don't have to like every tree, but if you've got blue gums or eucalyptus, that's a big plus. Most of those do have a good quality nectar and pollen rating, okay, out of 4. So 4 out of 4 is fantastic. You can't get better. And 0 out of 4 is there isn't anything. For example, like a lot of people say, oh, can you keep bees on corn or maize? And the answer is not really no. You get a slight amount of pollen and that's it. There's no nectar. On sunflowers, however, on the other hand, is pretty good. You get both pollen and nectar from sunflower. The only trouble is that with things like Monsanto and Bayer and the other seed sellers, there's only about 6 of them now in the world, conglomerates, monopolies really. They've been genetically modifying the seeds for sunflowers amongst other crops, and since, like, let's say the 70s, 80s, before major hybridization and or especially GMOs have been put into play, sunflowers is a perfect example. They used to flower for 6 weeks. Okay, so that's a long time. It's a decent, strong time for bees, at least. But guess what? 6 weeks is a long time for a farmer to wait for harvesting their seeds, the yield. Okay, so over a period of time, what's happened is that's now dropped down to 21 days, 3 weeks. So we had a 50% flowering time now. So now bees that used to forage on those flowers, they've got 50% less time to do so. Okay, and not only that, but number of the seeds that are being provided nowadays are either they don't produce pollen anymore, or they don't produce nectar anymore, which is problematic, as you can tell. And in some cases, there are some GMOs that even actually have a built-in type of pesticide in the secretion of the pollen. Okay, so it's problematic with GMOs. So if you are planting in your own veggies and on your own land, Liesel and anybody else out there who's planning on doing their self-sustaining gardens and food and all that sort of stuff, please, guys, ensure that you buy heirloom seeds. Now, heirloom seeds are ones that they may have been hybridized over the centuries, because we as humans, we have always like to improve. We take a better, if there's a field over there and a field over there, and this field's been producing better than that one for a couple of years, we generally will then take the seeds from that field over there, and we will get rid of the other seed. We won't use those other seeds next year, right? And in some cases, we'll have two really good fields next to each other, and we hybridize, or we cross pollinate those two to hopefully get even better yields. So that's hybridization, which is a very slow version of, let's say, and not as sort of manipulative as GMOs, right? But get yourself some heirloom seeds. That's the crux of that point. And there are some nice websites that you can get these from. So if you want to know about those, just buzz us in the comments, and I'll drop a line for heirloom seeds in South Africa. And there's a couple of nice seed swap groups that I've had on my channel before as co-hosts. And so there's lots of availability. Actually, there's no reason not to be able to find heirloom seeds to plant in your small holding, your farm, etc., or even your urban dwelling. Okay, sheddable, yeah, pesticides on the pollen for GMOs, yeah, that's pretty bad. And the problem is because there's 6 of these guys around the world, six monopolies selling GMO seeds. What ends up happening is that the moment you start buying seeds from these guys, a lot of the seeds, a lot of the child seed of the parent seed, in fact, in some cases there isn't a child seed. So what you used to be able to do, what we've been doing for millennia, is you plant something, by the time it comes up and gives you fruit, what ends up happening is that you can take the seed out of that fruit, plant it again, and you more or less get the same thing, right? With a lot of these GMOs now, what they're doing is that, like tomatoes, for example, you can't do that. You can't, either there are no seeds anymore, or the seeds are infertile. So you buy your 50 kilograms of tomato seeds and you plant your 50,000 hectares, or 5,000 hectares, whatever it is, of tomatoes. And that's all good and well, and you harvest. And you think, yeah, well, I don't have to go buy those seeds anymore. I don't have to go buy the seeds again. I'm just going to harvest some of the seeds from my own produce. And the Bayers and the Monsantos turn around and say, no, you're not going to be able to do that, because that's patented technology that you're using. And second of all, those seeds are dead. They're dormant. They're like infertile. They won't work. So you go thinking that you can plant those seeds the next season without paying for them again. And no, you can't. You have to go back to Monsanto and buy another 50 kilograms of tomato seeds. And in addition to that, what's also happened, and this is a bit of a slant, but in addition, what's also happened to that is that farmer A over here, who doesn't want to use any of Monsanto's seeds rather, and farmer B over there has decided, well, he thinks he's going to do better, or she thinks she's going to do better getting the Monsanto seeds. And what ends up happening is there can be cross-pollination, right? And what ends up happening is that if Monsanto suspects that your seeds, farmer A seeds over here, or tomatoes over here, have now had cross-pollination from their patented GMO seeds and pollen, they can test your pollen and your produce for markers, for genetic markers. If they find out that your produce has got genetic markers, they can sue you for stealing their patented technology, and they can shut you down and force you to buy their seeds in future. And so it's pretty bad. Even though that farmer A was not intentionally they were planting their own seeds. They didn't want to have anything to do with Monsanto. Now all of a sudden Monsanto says, well, we're going to shut you down or buy our seeds. And this is what's going on around the world. So anyway, enough of that. This World Bee Day. Let's get back to World Bee Day. So what other frequently asked questions do we get, guys? Or do you have for me? I've only got about 5 minutes, and I have to finish off and then sign over onto Zoom. So if you want to join us on Zoom in 5-10 minutes, we're going to be talking about the power of bees there and opportunities for beginner beekeepers. And to get that Zoom, get onto our Facebook page. That is Facebook.com/BeWareZA. In fact, I think I'll try and get that off for you guys now. If you're interested in joining us in the Zoom, and I think I'll actually just paste it in the chat quickly. And but in the meantime, guys, shoot off some couple of questions. Got maybe 2 more questions I can answer. I'm happy to answer any question you've got. No questions silly, stupid, or embarrassed to be asked. So come on, bring them on. Any questions? Any questions? Oh, in addition to Liesel's question about how many beehives can she keep on a property, right? So here's the other thing is that I would always recommend that you keep two beehives. All right. I would advise against using just one to start off with. And the reason being is that there is a chance, wherever you may be and however skilled you are at whatever level, that the bees leave. They can abscond and they leave the nest. Okay, they leave the hive. And then if you only had the one, you now have none. If you have two, however, there are ways that we can teach you through our workshops and online course, for example, that you can take that you can make another set of bees, another queen and another colony using the one that stayed behind. Okay, so that's a very important recommendation there and tip for you guys. Okay, if you and if you don't have the budget for that, the cool thing is that you can, as we're going to be talking about this afternoon, we're going to be giving away an ebook with regards to beekeeping, saving bees through bee removals. So there is a way to be able to make some money by doing bee removals and getting bee. So there's the pretty cool thing is that you get a couple of things. You get bees. Ideally, you should be charging for this service, but if you don't charge, then you're still getting the bees, and you're getting whatever beeswax and honey comes with it. But if you do bee removals, you can make some money out of it, which then funds your which then can fund your purchases of beehives and or nooks and other equipment. Plus you get bees. Now, if you're sharp about it, I'll give you a hint here. Another way of being able to opportunity for beginner beekeepers to make some money with honey and bees is that you offer a bee removal. You go get the bees. Now you've probably got some honey there, not a lot, but probably a little bit. And so you got two things. You got two choices here. Either you can keep the bees yourselves, farm with them, and produce honey, etc., or you could look at selling it to another beekeeper or another beginner beekeeper, and that way you can earn more money out of that too. And potentially you should have charged for the bee removal. But ideally, the bee removal, most of that funding is actually going to go to you being able to buy a box to put the bees in once you're done. So generally speaking, and covering your costs, so that you don't typically get keep that money, but you do get to keep the bees, which is awesome. The best food for bees, if it's substitute, you could be making pollen patties. So for pollen, maizena works pretty well, maize meal. But there are some recipes in the Beekeeping in South Africa book. We provide some of our own tested recipes in our online course on startbeekeeping.co.za. But we also have our own pollen substitute in Beware at the shop that you can order from us. That's as far as pollen substitute goes. But otherwise, feeding bees sugar water. So that's a 1-to-1 solution. At present, that would be a white sugar, 1 kilogram of white sugar to 1 liter of water. Make sure that it's hot enough just to stir it and let it dissolve, but not that you burn it or that it's put in boiling water. Let it cool off, and then you can feed that to the bees. How do you send hives and equipment? Courier better to come through and collect? We do send hives and equipment through courier. It's a little bit expensive on the hive side because of the volume, but feel free to come collect as well. We've got the store in Centurion. And if you order your stuff a couple of days before, we can make sure the stuff's packed and ready for collection, either by your own courier or mate or friends or whatever, or yourself. Thanks, Lisa. Good question. Elaine, which direction should the hives face? Okay. This is a bit of a contentious sort of question one, because a lot of people, I used to say as well, that it, I found in my personal experience that the bees should be facing, say, northeast-ish, basically facing the sunrise, which is a short answer to a long question. Don't know if I got that right, but but it also depends on which way you have wind blowing. So I think that's a factor, variable that I overlooked at the time when I was doing some experimenting on this. I think it's important that the bees don't have, that you just be careful that the bees don't have a crosswind or an on wind coming into the hive. That's also important. And then also they should be 1.5 meters above ground, ideally, especially if you have badgers nearby. And then also, ideally, depending on where you are and how hot you get in your area, they shouldn't be in full sun all year round, especially in the summertime, because bees are going to use the resources to cool the hive down, and or in some cases the wax may even melt if the hive gets really, really hot, especially if it's sitting on a roof or something like that, a tin roof, etc. So bear that in mind. You could do semi-shade potentially in the summer months, even if you're putting a shade netting over the bees. I would say that's probably a couple of the variables that I'd look into. And why sunrise? Well, essentially the bees, they wake up earlier than we do. They can see light at different levels than we do. So where we, think dusk, or sorry, dawn might be at, like, say, 5 a.m. They could still, if the temperatures are still okay, if the temperatures above 9 degrees, they could possibly still already they could be out by 4:30 already. Okay, especially if they can tell that it's sort of pre-dawn, if that makes sense. So I do tend to, and that extra half an hour or even hour in the day, in the mornings, and then the same in the evenings, can make a massive difference to your production and the yield and the thriving, basically, ability of your colony. Okay, cool, guys. I've got to go. Thank you for joining us. It's awesome to have had you on and having your questions. Hope you've enjoyed the experience. Like, subscribe, do the thing in the comments box, and pop over to Zoom. I've got to run. I've got to get over there because I've got like a minute to sign in there. And we'll see you there, guys. All right. Hopefully we'll see you on the Zoom for the power of bees and opportunities for beginner beekeepers. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care and have a great weekend, and happy World Bee Day. Let's buzz together. Ciao, ciao.